Welcome. Today we're going to learn about reference angles. So our example for today is cotangent of 17 pi over 6, and we're going to solve that without the use of a calculator. So before we begin, actually as part of beginning, what we're going to do is replace our cotangent with a trig identity, cosine over sine. And we're going to do that because it'll be a lot easier to find our angles using cosines and sines without a calculator. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that, and when we do that, our theta, or our angle, is 17 pi over 6, so we're going to replace that. So essentially, we're going to be looking for the cosine of 17 pi over 6 over the sine of 17 pi over 6. Now, anytime your angle is outside of the first quadrant, you want to use a reference angle, because when you do that, the result, the magnitude or the number answer will be the same, and then it's just a question of determining the sign, S-I-G-N, whether you have a positive or negative answer. And in order to do that, you want to find out what quadrant you're actually in with your actual angle. In this case, I mean 17 pi over 6. You'd want to know what quadrant you wind up in. Now, how do we get our reference angle? Well, 17 pi over 6, the first thing you want to do is make sure that your angle is reduced to the lowest common denominator and the lowest terms, basically. So, not common denominator, basically lowest terms. So that's what you really want to do here. And our angle, 17 pi over 6, well, 17/6 as a fraction cannot be reduced any further. So we're already reduced to lowest terms. Now, you want to look at the denominator. Well, it's clearly over 6. We have a pi over 6 situation, a multiple of pi over 6. So that tells you that your reference angle is pi over 6 in this case. So that is what we're going to actually use first to determine the magnitude of our answer. And then, as I said later on, we were going to find out where 17 pi over 6 actually puts us in terms of the unit circle. And once we know what quadrant we're in, we can then determine whether our answer is actually positive or negative. Okay, so here we go. We're going to replace our angle with our reference angle, which we have done. And now it's a question of actually calculating that. I have this quick memory method, which apparently works quite well, so that you don't need a calculator, and it's not very difficult to memorize this. So in step number 1, this is how we do this. You're going to create a table. You're going to start writing the numbers 1, 2, 3 down in a column, and then to the right of that, you're going to write 3, 2, 1. So just 1, 2, 3, and then 3, 2, 1. In step number 2, you want to divide all those numbers that we created in our yellow table. In the green table, we divide them all by 2. And then the last step, step 3, we take the square root of all the numerators, and you can see that in blue. Then we're going to surround this table with the information that's going to help us figure out our angles. So in the first column, if you've noticed, I've written pi over 3, pi over 4, and pi over 6. Those numbers must be in that particular order, and it's easy to remember because they are numerical. Then if you go to the top row, we have put cosine and sine over the last 2 columns. And that's kind of a good method to remember the order there is that the C in cosine is alphabetically before the S in sine. So the cosine is always first. Okay, so now we're going to use the information. I've recreated our table here in 1. And we're going to, since we're looking for the cosine of pi over 6, we are going to follow the second column down, the cosine, and have that intersect with the last row, which says pi over 6. And when you intersect them, you wind up with square root of 3 over 2. We're going to do the same thing with sine, and we wind up with 1/2. Then in item 2, since in our case we're dealing with cotangent, so remember that's cosine divided by sine. The cosine of pi over 6 was square root of 3 over 2, so we put that in our numerator. And the sine of pi over 6 was 1/2, so we put that in our denominator. Do a little math, and we wind up with square root of 3. That is the magnitude of the answer of our original problem. But as I said earlier, there are two parts. The first part is your magnitude or number, but the second part you have to determine your SIGN, whether your answer is positive or negative. The reference angles only help us with magnitude. Okay, so let's recap what we've done. We have the cotangent of 17 pi over 6. So first, we changed that to cosine and sine. Then we used the reference angle pi over 6. Then we solved the cosine of pi over 6 and the sine of pi over 6 using the tables that I showed you how to create. Did our math, and we wind up with the square root of 3. And as I said, that is the magnitude of our answer. But now we have to know whether our answer is positive or negative. So now we go back to the original angle, which was 17 pi over 6. We need to know where is that located. So we start in our unit circle at the 3 o'clock position, and if you do one full revolution around, you should know that takes you to 2 pi. But in terms of pi over 6, that would be 12 pi over 6. And then, so one full revolution brings you to 12 pi over 6. And then, if you've noticed, I've divided up this unit circle. The top half is divided into 6 sections, and so is the bottom half. 6 sections because they're pi over 6 sections. So once we've done one revolution, and that brings us to 12 pi over 6, if we count each section going in a counterclockwise manner from there, we move on to 13 pi over 6, 14 pi over 6, 15 pi over 6, 16 pi over 6, and finally we reach 17 pi over 6, and I've circled that in red, and we're in the second quadrant. So why do I need to know that we're in the second quadrant? Because that tells me the sign, SIGN. Okay, so let's see how that works. Well, our cotangent, as I said, is cosine over sine, which is x over r being our radius, over y over r. The radius on a unit circle is 1, so we don't really worry about that too much. That leaves us with x over y. Now, what is the x values in the second quadrant? Well, they're always negative. And how about the y values in the second quadrant? They're always positive. So that means your answer is negative over positive, which gives you a negative answer. So our final solution to our problem of cotangent of 17 pi over 6 is negative square root of 3. And that is an example on reference angles. Now go practice, practice, and practice some more.